Welcome everyone to this short session. Thank you for being here. This is the second time that I'm running the session, so you might see the last time I performed it was 2 years ago, and of course since then some kind of tools have changed, some tools have remained the same. My name is Vasileios Karakasis. I'm lecturer of European Studies. I'm also a member in the multi-level regulation research group. And today I'm going to introduce some kind of tools that you could use for the research process, particularly for the literature review. I have a key disclaimer is that I'm not an expert in AI tools. It's just that I've practiced the particular ones based on my research and also after scrolling a lot on Twitter, X. Actually, right now probably we don't know how it's going to be renamed. It's quite important to consider them as smart, intelligent undergraduate students who are going to work as research assistants. So this is a key disclaimer. And this practically means that you do not solely rely your research on them. What you actually try to do is to train them. So therefore, we should not start with the premise that once I understood these tools, it means that I should blindly trust them. There are some tools that could actually accelerate the process only if your background, your knowledge is already strong. Today's session, I've created a short roadmap of the research process. Needless to say that the research process is much more complicated than the one that I'm presenting here. Here I actually have simplified it for the purpose of 1 hour session. So it starts with 4 steps: conception, development, drafting, and revision. So when we talk about conception, I'm talking about the research questions. And under each step, I'm explaining what kind of tools you could use in order to properly implement the process. I have to say that I've created also a QR code for each tool so that you could actually use your mobile phone and direct yourself into this tool and see how you could use it. When it comes to the development, we're talking mainly about the literature review, and there are 2 other tools. So when it comes to the conception, the 3 tools that I'm strongly suggesting is Elicit, Consensus, and Perplexity. And of course, I highlighted the yellow Perplexity because I find it as the most hands-on tool in contrast with the other tools. But of course, also the other ones are more academic than Perplexity. When it comes to development, I'm suggesting the use of 2 main tools, and I will explain why: Research Rabbit and Inciteful. Inciteful is more hands-on. You don't need to sign in. You could actually directly copy-paste one title or one DOI from the article and see afterwards. You can have a network analysis and see how some authors are connected to each other. The 3rd step is draft. So in this case, when you have, let's say, when you need to put some things on paper, there are some tools. Some of you have already used them, some others have not. And I'm not referring, of course, to ChatGPT, although have already some kind of prompts that you could use from ChatGPT for your particular case. But the most hands-on that I've seen is Jenni. Jenni is actually a really hands-on tool when you want, when you're stuck, you want to write something and you start typing some words, and then Jenni actually completes the sentence that you have in mind. But of course, this requires a paid subscription. You can have, I think, 20 or 30 trials for free. And finally, we have for the revision, most of you are familiar with Killbot or with Grammarly, but there is also another tool that I find really useful, Paperpal. I don't think that we have the time to actually go through all the tools, but we'll focus mainly on the ones that focus on conception and development. And we're going to conclude also with some key remarks, key reflections on the use of the tools in the research process. Okay. So, as I mentioned before, the first thing you need to do before starting any proposal, any paper, is actually come up with an overarching either research question or a research objective. And as I mentioned before, there are 3 applications that could help you brainstorm the research questions. It might be Elicit, Perplexity, and Consensus. I have come up with some examples, but of course, what matters here is also your own field of expertise. Let's start. We have 3 tools: Elicit, Consensus, and Perplexity. I don't know if you cannot, if you don't have a I assume you all have mobile phones where you can use your camera, so feel free to use those, and let's start with some kind of prompts. Good. And in this case, from how many papers have they summarized? 10 papers.
Because 20 is the previous one and then.
Correct. So you see that the student asked a question about the effectiveness of lobbying, and she received an answer based on the summary of 10 academic articles. So imagine this is the job that we were supposed to do. So we had to go through the 10 articles, go to each of them, and I think that according to my own personal estimations, for an academic article, 6 pages equals to 1 hour of work, meaning that you need to study, to keep notes, and reflect on that and see how it contributes to the development of the literature review. Now, with one click, with one typing, you have 10 academic articles in a couple of minutes, seconds. What is the disadvantage with this process? Yes, this is a question.
You don't know what part of the whole academic literature on this topic these 10 articles are.
Bingo. That's actually the most important one. You cannot actually have a critical evaluation of the source. Is it coming from a credible journal? Yes or no? Is it coming from an author? The authors exist. The articles exist. It's not ChatGPT where you could actually come up with a literature review about people that you don't know. These people exist. To what extent are these people credible is questionable. What is the second disadvantage with this? The second disadvantage is that most of those articles might be more than 20 years old. When you start with a literature review, you have to start always with the most recent literature. Most recent means the last 5 years. If you check on Elicit, probably the sources that you will see are coming from 2005, 2006, so they might be 20 years old. But still, the advantage of this process is that you start from somewhere. Especially for people like me that are stuck when they have to write some words in a Word document, this is a really good starting point. Because guess what? This kind of tools are not yet easily captured by Turnitin, or by Original, or by other tools. So this is a really good starting point. But there are also many weak points as the ones that we mentioned. Another tool that I could suggest is Perplexity. And Perplexity has different roles, but of course we cannot go through all of them. So for instance, if the task that you have to perform is to build a literature review, you could actually come up with the following prompt to Perplexity. You could mention, find the most cited articles on the topic that you're interested in. Digital taxation, digitalization of education. It's up to you. What is the topic you're most interested in? Summarize the key findings and provide publication details. Author, journal, year. So this is a kind of prompt that you could use if the objective of the exercise is to build a literature review. That's the first one of those steps for Perplexity. Another one is the so-called research gap identifier. So another prompt that you could use is to analyze the recent publications, again, on the topic that you're most interested in. And you could formulate this sentence. Identify research gaps or areas where further study is needed. Still, you realize that this is an AI tool, it's not humans, which means that the summary aspect of the answer outweighs the critical reflection. Still, we're talking about tools that do an excellent summary, but the critical reflection is quite questionable. I'm not saying that it's bad, but still it warrants further reflection. Another prompt that you could formulate is the methodology explorer. You could mention, for instance, 3 commonly used research methodologies for studying this topic, and include examples of studies that use them. For our department, this gains currency because most of our students are doing qualitative research. They have to do comparative studies, or they have to use a particular methods, let's say like process tracing or something similar. And it's quite important for them to understand how these processes have been applied in different cases. So it's quite important to include some examples that have made use of those processes. And this is where Perplexity is extremely helpful. Another sentence, another prompt that you could use is the thesis statement advisor. So for instance, you could formulate this prompt: create a clear and concise thesis statement for a research paper on this topic. Include a brief rationale for its importance. So it's actually this is the marketing aspect of your paper. If you're working with an assignment provider, you need to explain what is the added value of your research vis-a-vis other papers. So why should the assignment provider care about your topic? And this is actually a good starting point in order to properly sell your research. Another tool is the academic argument structure. So the prompt goes as follows: help structure a well-argued essay on this particular topic. Include an introduction, 1 point, and a conclusion in bullet points. And finally, another prompt is the data source finder. So identify reliable data sources or data sets for research on this particular topic. Include links and description of their relevance. So if somebody has already used it and would like to share what he or she got, please feel free to do so. Because this works with Perplexity. If you're more interested in raising a debate, for instance, there is a research question, and there is always a kind of dichotomy, there is a contradiction, there is a debate about a particular topic, the tool that I find much more useful is consensus. If you actually come up with consensus and if you ask a question that could end with a yes or no, is poverty the main reason for armed conflicts? So in this particular case, you could actually come up with a debate, and consensus provides with the pros and cons in a theory that says, yes, poverty is immediately linked to armed conflict or poverty is not. And you have this separation of scholars based on this debate. So, and still you realize the amount of time you're saving if you use this tool, because you're supposed to do this work when you're actually studying. Imagine that you have to go to each PDF or book and go and see, okay, this author says, yes, poverty is linked to armed conflict, or poverty is not. So it's quite important to see how much work you save, how much time you work, how much time you save through this tool. Yes?
Question. If I put my question in English, does it also search Dutch databases or only English ones?
Good question. I think some of those tools give also Dutch answers. I think Perplexity should have also Dutch answers. But for consensus, I doubt it.
Yeah.
It might be the case, but I doubt it. Perplexity should give also. If you ask the formulated question in Dutch, you should get also a Dutch answer.
But I mean, for example, I have a question in English.
Yes.
And then does it search in Dutch articles and then translate it in English?
You need to identify this. So you need to mention this in the prompt that, when you do the research, please rely also on Dutch sources.
Okay, nice.
So it's quite important to mention it in the prompt.
Yeah.
And I assume you'll come up with something. So it's...
Okay, great.
So, I completed my PhD in 2020, and honestly, if you asked me back in 2020, would you do a PhD again? I would say no. No. It was one of the biggest mistakes in my life. It was 5 years that I spent with no reason. This is the feeling, right? Now, I would say, look, if I could save some time, I would have done this. When it comes to the PhD, still knowledge matters, because when you actually come up with the sources, you need to be familiar with the literature. Imagine that you start, digging into some articles, some books, and it's the first time you see them. In this case, you're prey to the literature. You don't know whether the literature you're using is facilitating your point. So still, as a PhD student, it's quite important to have a good control to monitor properly the literature, because once you know who are the biggest players in this particular theory, or who are, the biggest players in this field. In this case, you could actually instrumentalize the sources. If you don't know, then in this case, you would say good luck, because you might put there, and your supervisor might say, look, these authors that you're citing are not significant. And the same applies, for instance, to Perplexity. Perplexity, for instance, might be citing also Wikipedia. They might say, look, for this source, to make my point, I'm citing Wikipedia. In this case, if you cite Wikipedia, good luck then. In this case, your supervisor says that you have no idea what you're doing, then you have the issue. So this explains that knowledge still matters. When it comes to the formulation of the text, still, you need to make some revisions. You cannot actually copy-paste it. Because if you see, for instance, the answer that you get is a really structured answer, but you need to elaborate. So you need to actually formulate your own topic sentence. You need to also to provide your own arguments. But the good thing with these tools is that you can start from somewhere, rather than starting from scratch, which is the worst. Another thing, if for instance somebody still does not trust the other tools, and they think that ChatGPT is the only one, I disagree, and I've explained my case why. In this case, you could use other tools, these particular prompts. For instance, you could actually come up with this following prompt saying, act as a research strategist, GPT, and provide a step-by-step guide for using frameworks like SWOT or PESTLE. I don't know if you're familiar with PESTLE. For us, is the political, economic, social, technological, legal factors in a particular topic. In organizing research for digital taxation in the EU, include time-saving tips and tools. This is a good prompt for you in order to just put your research in perspective. It doesn't provide you any details in terms of literature review, but it actually points out how you could frame your work. Another prompt could be suggest frameworks like mind mapping or pyramid principle for structuring content on social media and political polarization in the EU. Provide practical examples and time-saving methods to implement them. You see, these topics are highlighted in yellow because it's just the topics that I picked. You're going to, of course, pick your own topics and use this prompt for this particular purpose. Questions before we move to the next step, which is the development, the literature review builder. Okay, we move to the next step. We talk about conception. Now we're going to talk about the literature review. And the tool that I strongly suggest is called Inciteful. So what you have to do here is, if you have already done the work through Perplexity or Elicit, please copy-paste the title of one article that you found most appealing and paste the title of the article in the search engine of this tool. The tool is called Inciteful.xyz. If you have not, have you managed to scan it, or? And I want to hear from you, what do you see?
Sorry, so you said we have to copy the...
One article from the previous tools that you used, Perplexity or Consensus, find the title of one article and copy-paste the title of that article to the search engine of the Inciteful. And tell me, what do you see there? For instance, I tried to do this with an article that I published 6 years ago about a crisis in the Aegean between Greece and Turkey. It was through the use of Q methodology. Right now this is quite irrelevant. I copy-pasted this title there, and I was trying to see whom I relate to. So I was trying to see who are the, because what this tool does, and you'll see that probably there, is that it conducts a network analysis. It shows there how people are connected between each other based on the citations. Can you see that? I'll give you a minute so that you could check, because you need some time.
You gave me
You want to conduct a literature review and see which other papers are relevant for the case. In this case, you have the one article, and then you can see who other authors are relevant in this field of study. Of course, this field of study is quite questionable because AI cannot recognize interdisciplinary connections. We need to start with this disclaimer, meaning that the topic is the one that matters, or the theoretical approach, or the methodology properly. AI is not in the position to say, okay, this is pretty much the same field of studies. They actually recognize some keywords, and based on those keywords, they actually show how you're connected, how this particular article is connected to others. It takes some time indeed. There's another tool that you could use, which I find it's not hands-on because you need to sign up, and this will take some time. It's called Research Rabbit. Unfortunately, I've not formulated a QR code for this. So you have to Google it in order to find it. And this will take some time because you need to sign up. So yeah, I think we have 2 minutes more we could actually spend on using this tool, because you might find this also interesting, especially if you want to find authors that belong to the same field of study or that are using similar concepts. This is more well equipped to conduct a literature review than other tools. I don't know if we have the time to address this, but I can give you 1 minute so that you sign up to this tool and actually come up with an exercise. But if you wait for the Inciteful, you see afterwards that it has already conducted this graph with the people that are linked to each other. So Research Rabbit, and then after you do this, we can check the steps that you need to follow. Still keep the same title of the article that you used, so that you could also apply it in this tool. If you have already signed up, let me know so that we could actually check how this tool works. Okay, I see that some of you have already signed up. So you see this page, and on your left, you'll see some kind of categories. You can see a column like new collection, new category, etc., etc. What you could click is, for instance, new collection. You click on this link. And what will show up is something called Add Papers, a green button that says Add Papers. You click on that, and once you click, a search engine, kind of a search, let's say, window is going to pop up, and this is where you're going to copy-paste the title of the paper. And once you do this, you on your right, you see it's something called Add Collection. You click on that, and you go back to the collection, check on this title, and click on something called Similar Work. And once you click on Similar Work, what you're going to see is again a network analysis of all the authors that are allegedly relevant to the article. So of course this depends a lot on the type of article, but you can see here, for instance, to what extent some authors are more connected with each other than the others. So for instance, in this particular example, I found something on English literature, which is, irrelevant for me. You see that when you see the green color, you see that there is a link between those people based on the academic field. And you can see other authors, names of authors, that are blue, but they are not connected with each other. They are just cited, but there's no further correlation between them. Meaning that besides the citation, there's nothing more that connects those people between each other. It's just the list of citations that you'll see in this particular article. Okay, shall I move on to the draft? So when it comes to the challenges of writing a workflow or the content strategy, ChatGPT could be a useful tool. Let's be clear. Don't use ChatGPT for literature review. So I'm going to share with you another experience with my wife. She had to write an essay on a literature review on play therapy for children with autism. have no idea of the subject. And she actually asked ChatGPT, provide me with the most recent literature review on this particular topic. And you know, she saw the names, they were familiar, say, yes, actually, I've heard these people. And I'm asking her, please, could you check on Google Scholar whether these people exist? So she checked on Google Scholar. The people existed, the articles did not exist. So, because the wording has changed. So, for instance, if you come up with, let's say, an article, for instance, it's called the Greed and Grievance Theory about, for instance, the eruption of armed conflicts. In this case, the article would be named on ChatGPT on greed and grief, but the original article is on greed and grievance. So what I want to say is that the Google Scholar is giving you the right name, but ChatGPT is using linguistic models and they're altering. So they're actually changing the title. They're also citing journals that do not exist. So the journals could exist, they could, but they do not. So that's why when you use ChatGPT, you use it only for the workflow or for mind mapping or for other tools, but you don't use it for literature review. Of course, probably since then, because she used it for the first time somewhere in 2023, in January, I assume that after this feedback loop, I assume that this tool has been improved when it comes to the literature review. But still, there are other tools that you could use for literature review. ChatGPT is not one of them. And of course, if you as a student and you, I don't know, as a supervisor, don't know the literature, then you might fall entrapped. And your student might come up with a source that does not exist. So this is quite a challenge here, and it's quite important to prevent this. So, a prompt that you could give to ChatGPT if you are in the drafting process. You are an NI writing coach. Suggest a workflow using bullet points from transforming scattered research notes on the role of AI-driven models for risk assessment in banking. I actually came up from ChatGPT with this title, into a cohesive article. Include templates for structuring arguments. So for instance, there have been some methods about when you have to write 200 words per day. In this case, you don't know how to start. Providing a framework could be actually a useful tip. I'm not sure that whether this works for most of you. For me, it worked only in particular cases, but for somebody needs to know that if I need to check that the day has gone well, it means I have written 200 words. But of course you realize from experience that this is not the case. Someday you might wake up and write 5,000 words because, I don't know, God gave you, the inspiration. And there might be another day where God has not given you any inspiration and you don't write anything. And I think this is pretty much, at least based on my experience, the process. Another thing could be, for instance, a prompt, generate a content strategy outline for creating in-depth posts about the pros and cons of digital taxation in the EU. When it comes to social media, they could do an amazing work, especially, with this kind of tools about, for instance, new alert about a publication, or people I'm excited about, or shameless, how we call it, shameless self-recognition. I don't know, this weird stuff that academics write on LinkedIn, and they're actually quite happy with that. So ChatGPT could create some kind of signals, some kind of signs that you could use for posts, either on Twitter or on LinkedIn. So, and it includes, and you can mention, includes sections for research tips, frameworks, for content planning, and suggestions for efficiently summarizing information. These are some tools, some prompts that you could use if you want to actually have the big picture on how to approach your writing strategy. This is from ChatGPT, but there's another tool that is more tailor-made to help you with the writing process. And I think this has a paid subscription, but of course you can use it for free for 10 times, for 10 prompts, and I think that this is a good opportunity for you to use it. It's called Jenni.ai. So you actually provide a title of what you want to do, and you start writing a sentence, and you'll see what happens next. I'm not saying anything more. You could actually give it a shot yourselves. Jenni AI, not with a Y, with an I. So yeah, I hope you can see that. please try it yourself so that, you know, it's different when you see it yourselves rather than having me to describe it.
We're going to turn into zombies like this.
The objective of this session was not, you know, to transform you into zombies, but I just wanted to let you know, to inform you that this kind of tool exists. So, Simone, what happened?
Yeah, I just typed in one sentence that I wanted to, use research results to develop tools for teachers that they can use in the teaching. And then it starts just writing, and then you accept it, and then it writes more, and then it writes more, including also the citations. I don't know if all these citations are correct. Are they? I don't know if you... Yeah.
Me neither. I think they exist. I don't know
Yeah.
how credible the sources are, because it's quite important for you to know the field.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's the sentence per se much sound right, content-wise.
Pretty good.
So this is a tool, but you realize there's a paid subscription for this. So you can use, I don't know, 10 or 20 prompts, or you can write small essays for this, but nothing more than that. Afterwards, you need to pay, and I think it's around 90 euro per year, something like that.
It's not that much.
I think it's not that much. But you realize when it comes to the human creativity, yeah, it becomes a bit questionable, because, you know, the room for inspiration is, yeah.
But loads of people out of a job, right? Like,
Yeah, it's
going to get better and better. So.
You know, when I had made this presentation for the English teachers in our department, there was, you know, a lot of trauma, especially for the English teachers, because their focus is indeed in the editing aspects. And if you have the tools there that do the whole job for them, you realize that the content of the work has to change. And the last one is about revision. So in this case, let's assume you have already formulated your text, you have a document, and in this case, you need to check whether your text stands correctly. In most cases, since it's AI written, I assume that the mistake should be minimal. But still, if you want to be sure, you can actually use PaperPal for this. PaperPal is something like Grammarly. So what it does is checking your sentences, and it provides suggestions on how to improve your text. So for instance, if you have already a text, you can copy paste there. But my personal opinion is that the tools that you have already have formulated the text correct. But the idea is that once you actually copy paste the text you get from the AI tools to the Word document, you revise them. You don't actually keep them as they are. You need to paraphrase. You need actually to put to some extent your own input there, to some extent. So therefore, it's quite important also to take this into consideration. When it comes to the PaperPal, I think you don't pay anything. You can use it for around 80, 90 times until 5,000 words each time you copy paste something. So afterwards, you need to pay a subscription. So since we have 3 minutes, so I'm going. Other questions about the tools, because right now we're going to just end up with some kind of reflections. What can the AI do, what they cannot do? We're going to just provide the summary. Do you have a question about the tools? Probably many, but there might be also not the time to address them all. If they are, please do not hesitate to ask me. So, what AI cannot do? First of all, comprehension and interpretation. Depth and source selection, and ethical and methodological concerns. Let's go step by step. When it comes to comprehension interpretation, what the AI cannot do, and you can do, is to critically evaluate the arguments. So, as you can see, AI could summarize the content, they find the keywords, and they could actually do the best out of it, but they cannot actually critically evaluate the argument. Another key point, especially for people that are working a lot on, let's say, constructivist way, they misinterpret the historical context. They don't care when the article was written, whether the language that the article was using was the proper or not. So these kind of aspects are not taken into consideration by AI. They don't have this critical thinking to consider the context within which the article was written or not. They don't know whether the article is using an offensive language or not, or whether the jargon is the one that should be used or not. So this is the first thing that AI cannot do. Second, they don't have access to the paywalled articles. So this says a lot about to what extent they critically evaluate the articles. If you have to go to a journal on contemporary European politics, and so let's say you need to evaluate the argument that the author does, if you don't have access to the author, to the content, you just evaluate the abstract that the author is using for his or her article. So there's actually an issue about to what extent you have conducted a proper literature review. Another thing, they cannot assess the credibility of the journal. It's not that all journals have the same ranking. I'm not saying that you should fully rely on the way articles are ranked, meaning in terms of the impact factor that they're making, but still this is one indicator. There are many other indicators that should be taken into consideration, but as I mentioned before, the credibility of a journal, meaning the process that they followed, because for instance there might be some academic journals that do not follow the peer review process, meaning that you submit the article and there are 2-3 reviewers that check what you have written. If this does not exist, you realize that science is questionable. Another thing that AI does is it repackages existing knowledge. They do not actually offer a fresh insight. Finally, when it comes to concerns, they miss the ethical considerations in sensitive topics. Let's assume migration, which is extremely an sensitive topic, or they do not recognize the limitations. Still, this is quite linked to the, let's say, the problem in critically evaluating the arguments. Still, this shows that due to this limitation, there's still some work for us. So first of all, we still need to cross-check the information. So whatever is written, you don't say, okay, since ChatGPT said that, then it's right. No, still there's some room for cross-checking. You need to assess the credibility, and you need, as I mentioned, to use AI as a starting point, as your research assistant, and not a final answer. So, as I mentioned before, with the example of my wife, we had the example of, we had to check on Google Scholar, or on Scopus, or on the Web of Science. Since these are, let's say, the points of reference when you want to check whether an article is scientific or not. When it comes to assessing the credibility, again, there are different indicators, and I'm open to discuss all of them, but you need to check also the ranking of the journal in its own field, the peer review status, so in this case, how long does it take for one article to get published, and of course the credentials of the authors that write it. So these are key criteria that have to be considered. And as I mentioned before, and this is the conclusion, this, when it comes to AI, this is a really good starting point, but this is not the main point of the research. Still, there's a lot of work that you need to do. So therefore, this kind of tools complement, but they do not replace all the traditional research methods. And you can see that because they don't have access to articles, they could not actually come up with a critical evaluation, but of course, they have the linguistic model in order to identify some gaps, but still you need to check whether identifying the gaps matters or not. This is another thing. And you still need to evaluate the conclusions. Still, this has to be put in perspective. Questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.